Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope we'll be getting a larger crowd as the morning goes on, but I think we probably, out of courtesy to people's schedules, we need to go ahead and get started. Our first presentation will be a discussion with racing commissioners and other key participants in state regulations. I'd like to introduce from my left Ms. Kelli Talbott, who's a Senior Deputy Attorney General of West Virginia. Next is Mr. John Sabini, who is Chairman of the New York State Racing and Wagering Board, and he's also Chairman of the Racing Commissioners International. So you know what a fun year he's having. Next is Mr. Hugh Gallagher, who's Executive Director of the Delaware Harness Racing Commission, and we also have, welcome back, Joe Gorajec, who spoke yesterday, who is Executive Director of the Indiana Horse Racing Commission. As a prelude to this discussion, I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth for a few moments. Having been involved with covering racing for some 30 years, beginning in the 1960s and prior to my present post, I've found myself frustrated by racing commissions at times, while at other times I've been openly admiring and sympathetic to the realities of what they face. The predecessor of the Racing Commissioners International was called the National Association of State Racing Commissioners. Notations in the blood horse as early as 1948 make reference to an NASRC committee on stimulation and drugs. So that is a subject that had been on the radar screen since not long after the acronym RADAR was first employed. A couple of years later, in another report in the blood horse, there was a reference to another committee. I turned the page. What's this? The Uniform Rules Committee. Ah, great idea. Get all the states to have the same rules. Good for participants, good for the public alike. Let's do it, said the NASRC. Well, 62 years later, it still seems like a good idea, but it is yet to be achieved. In 1991, the Blood Horse surveyed racing commissioners about recommendations coming out of the first McKinsey report, which was commissioned by the Jockey Club. We actually published the questions and the names of all those who voted yea or nay. The recommendations included: test fewer horses for medication, but test more thoroughly. 2, establish uniform rules state by state for medication testing. 3, establish an accreditation program for testing labs. Respondents to these questions supported all 3 by a minimum of 70% yeas. And yet, even though their names were there in the trade press as being in favor of these recommendations, to my knowledge, none of them ever resulted in wholesale adoption. So there is a case of frustration with racing commissions. But now let me take the other side. We have that slide, please? This is a slide provided by the Minnesota Racing Commission with the invitation to make a joke about it. This is a schematic illustration of the steps that have to take place in order for Minnesota to make certain types of rule changes. This is why Minnesota is still hoping a compact can be created. I would ask each of you, whatever job you have, whatever you do in life, to consider the proposition that you make a decision but then have to submit to a 45-day public comment period. Wouldn't that just drive you crazy? I'm not carping about public comment in terms of democracy in action, but from the standpoint of the people trying to exert leadership and get something done, it must be really discouraging at times. If I were in that situation, I'm afraid the impetus to get something done might eventually be weakened by the tendency to say, why bother? So ultimately, I have a lot of respect for racing commissions. That leads to my first question for this panel, and I hope each will respond in turn. Uniformity. It is glibly spoken of as an obvious and reachable goal by people who are not racing regulators. But for those of you who are, what are the considerations? Is uniformity of racing rules among states compatible with or at odds with your view of your commission's mandate for racing regulation in your state? And I will ask Mr. Sabini first, referring to his role as chairman of the RCI, to comment on uniformity. Can it work? What are the impediments, and why hasn't it worked?
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to appear in this cathedral of racing at Keeneland. Uniformity is a goal of the Racing Commissioners International and, frankly, of many of the individual states. The problem that you saw in that graph is that each state has their own issues. Each state has their own constituencies that may or may not help that cause. RCI's position has been for a number of years now that the best way to achieve uniformity is to have an interstate racing compact. We believe that that would allow states to participate in a broad uniformity, react quickly to things like we did with steroids and with other issues that come up in the media, and we all know what the media has focused on this year, particularly the New York Times, and would allow states that don't like a particular rule or have a constituency that has a particular problem with a rule change to opt out of what would be a soft compact. But we believe that that's the best way to achieve uniformity. There are those, some in this room, who have proposed federal regulation. And we think that there's a role for the compact if you move forward with federal regulation that would still allow the state's hegemony, and that is to require states that participate in signals across state lines to be part of an interstate racing compact. We believe that that's the best way to get uniformity and still have the political eye on the fact that the states want to keep the revenue within its borders. And RCI has been pushing this. Kentucky has adopted it. And we had one house in New York State adopt it, but again, there are groups that are against it. They fear the new. Very often in horse racing, everyone fears the new. We once put out a rule for a rule change. I won't give up who sent this to us, but a prominent group sent a one-word reply when a rule change went out for public comment, and a one-sentence reply, and the one sentence was, "We can't do this, it's never been done before." And it was signed, and I actually thought of framing it and putting it above my desk, because that's often the fear of people is that, well, we've done okay under this. Well, we're not doing so okay. Obviously, attendance is down, handle is down, we're up for a lot of scrutiny, and if we don't react in the 21st century environment, we're kind of doomed to continuing to see our sport whittled away, handle whittled away, and frankly, if the continued media scrutiny happens, we'll wind up much like dog racing, and that's not a happy place to be.
Thank you. Ms. Talbott, from the standpoint of being the Senior Deputy Attorney General, how does the idea of uniformity work into how you might approach your job? I mean, would you have is there a problem saying to the legislature, say that you recommend something because other people are doing it, or do you have any conflict there ever?
I think our legislature, who is ultimately responsible for approving our rules in West Virginia, has been very receptive to the fact that our commission has adopted many RCI model rules. Uniformity is consistent with the Racing Commission's mission in West Virginia, I believe. But I do believe that one of the major impediments is our rulemaking process. It may not be as complicated as Minnesota's, but it's pretty complicated. We have to have our rules go before our legislature when they're in session every year from January to March, and our rules are passed just like any other legislation. So there's a lot of political to and fro in that process. It's passed as a bill, the governor has to sign it, so there's a very lengthy process that we go through. So if West Virginia would ever enact or become a part of the racing compact, there would probably have to be additional legislation that would exempt us from the rulemaking process that we currently have to adhere to. So that's uniformity, I believe, is something that's consistent with West Virginia's mission, but there would have to probably be several law changes for us to achieve that.
Thank you. Mr. Gallagher, what's your take on uniformity and its possibility, its desirability, and the impediments?
Well, the desirability certainly is there. The desirability, from my position with rope, working with racing officials coast to coast, and in the Caribbean and Canada is there. We would love to have uniformity, just like, you know, umpires in baseball or officials in the NFL or hockey or any major sport would like to have it. Uniformity is desired, no question about it. Certainly with some house rules. You know, you have horses for courses, and there are unique features to every racetrack, and that has to be brought into play and factored in for sure. There are some obstacles to be overcome. There are some particular legislative bodies that have to be addressed in a certain way, and there are some degrees of understanding that are required by all elements of the industry. By that I mean to this learned group here, you know, the associations, the horsemen's group, and commissions. All elements of the industry have to unify. That's number one if we're going to achieve uniformity. What we try to do with RCI and our model rule approach is to first come up with models, good models, and models do not necessarily equate to uniformity. A lot of people misunderstand that, but that's the first step, and without that, we're not going to get anywhere. But we do attempt to create models that could become uniform, and we're on the way to that. We are on the way to that in some regards. Certainly, we've made a great deal of progress, particularly pertinent to this forum, the whip. I know that 5 years ago, beginning with work we did at Fair Hill and Delaware Park, John Wayne, Duncan Patterson brought in some whips that came in actually from some steeplechase riders. We looked at them, we looked at the diameter, the length, the weight. We looked at those closely. We took them out to South Dakota, of all places, steeplechase racing. And, you know, it was diligent, it was hard work. We stayed the course, and progress was made. And it was all for the good of the horse. And you know, we're not going to give up on that. So, and we're not going to give up on striving to make model rules become uniform rules. So I think that you'll find a great deal of determination within the membership of RCI. Good. You know, underneath not only Ed Martin and long-term executive directors like Joe Gorajec, former chairman Sabini. We have a number of committees, and we're dedicated to pursue this. But we have that side of it, and then there is the implementation of, I call RCI the theory, and then the practice is rope. These are the people that are the front line of the battle that have to put these rules into action.
Good.
And without that, you have nothing.
Yeah. Mr. Gorajec, what's your take on uniformity?
Uniformity, of course, is desirable. I agree with Hugh Gallagher up to a point. I think the model rules, we've made progress in model rules in a number of areas, but you had just mentioned, what was the year, 1948? If there's something that, if we don't do something differently than what we've been doing, then, you know, our grandchildren and great-grandchildren might be in this room 70 years from now talking about uniformity. I think if there's going to be true uniformity, the kind of uniformity that the public wants, the kind of uniformity that most of the industry wants, then I think that could only be achieved through some type of federal assistance.
Of course, at the Grayson-Jockey Club Foundation, I have the luxury of having tunnel vision. I can think, okay, if it's good for the horse, that's the end-all and be-all. You don't have the luxury of that. You have to talk about business of racing and so forth. But are there ways that the lack of uniformity is an impediment against giving the maximum protection of the horse? For example, we had the chart yesterday showing the tremendous range in medication requirements and allowability. Let's talk about how the rules, does the lack of uniformity put the horse at more risk than you're comfortable with? Just go by turns, please.
I think the simple answer is yes, that it hurts. Lack of uniformity does hurt with regard to protection of the horse. And that's why I believe West Virginia would support some process whereby there is uniformity. Like I said, the compact may be one way to achieve that if we could get that passed in West Virginia.
I think uniformity is important, but in terms of confusion about, for example, medication rules, yes, I think it's confusing, but I also think it's fair to say that, if you're driving cross country, the speed limit changes, and you kind of deal with it. It's posted, and you deal with it. And ignorance of the law is not an excuse. And, I can understand that medication rules are confusing, absolutely. But, folks are being paid a lot of money to race in a lot of our jurisdictions. And we heard a lot about continuing education yesterday, and perhaps that education has to start with, like, reading the rule book in the state rule, because ignorance of the law is not an excuse. And, as I said, if you drive across country, you're going to see pretty widely different speed limits. I drove from Louisville, and the speed limit was 70. You don't see that in New York State. But you would adhere to it, 65 in New York if you're in New York because it's posted. So I think it's a problem. They are confusing rules, but it really should be up to people whose job it is to put the horse on the track to educate themselves to the rules in the jurisdiction they're in.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Gallagher?
I think what Chairman Sabini said, the final comment was the key element there. It's the responsibility of the licensee, and frequently, as Counselor knows, they'll throw it back to us. No one told me. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. No one, they'll come into hearings, and no one told me this. I wasn't aware of that. No one in this jurisdiction told me that this was the problem. Now, obviously, uniformity would help that. But uniformity has obstacles as well. Yeah, it would be a panacea. It would solve a tremendous amount of problems if it was a sweeping brush and okay, all of a sudden we wake up tomorrow and every rule in every jurisdiction was the same. A nice column of here are the rules, here are the penalties, and you move forward. In the meantime, we have reality. We have, I believe 38 parimutuel jurisdictions in North America with, pretty much close to 38 different interpretations of rules and 38 different handlings of situations and matters. And how do we go about doing that? And that is the job that ROPE has before it. So uniformity, although it is a fascinating topic, I think there are a number of steps that need to precede that. And if I may, veer off of that and suggest something that may precede that, unless it's on your agenda.
No, go ahead.
And what this has to do with is, to me, one of my there are many topics in racing that are passionate for me, and none is more passionate than the license. And I've learned from many attorneys in this room, Alan Foreman being one of them, has taught me a great deal over the years. We're both from Maryland, and we go back a long way. longer than he'd like to admit. but that's true from conversations in schools and my attending commission meetings. But Alan has taught me a great deal. Mr. Bonney as well, having gone to the schools for well over 18 years. But my point is this. The license, if you don't have one, you don't compete. It's as simple as that. If you do have one, constitutional rights kick in. And the attorneys do their job to make sure that people are afforded those rights. And they're doing their job by doing that. And it's the obligation of stewards and judges to make sure that they're afforded those rights. And it's our job as racing officials, commissioners, regulators, to equip them with the best tools that they have, either by AGs or whatever. So one of the things that I'm working on is a temporary conditional license that has clearly defined progressive penalties. That's a project that I'm working on for repeat offenders that are up for renewal.
Good, thank you. Joe, how can you see, are there ways that the lack of uniformity is some sort of a threat? Maybe that's too strong a word. But it hurts your ability to protect the horse. Are there ways that lack of uniformity worries you on that score?
Well, it certainly can be, depending on what jurisdiction you're in. If you're in a state that has high standards, then you're probably in good shape. If you have a state that is lax and doesn't pass the model rules, then you're probably not in good shape. For example, let's take shockwave therapy. I think the model rule is 10 days out. We've adopted it in Indiana. Most states have. To an extent, a state hasn't adopted it. You know, when someone's giving a horse shockwave therapy, 3 days before the race, does that put the horse at risk? Maybe. Does it put the riders at risk? Maybe. So I think the answer to your question is yes, but it goes state by state, depending on what the issue is.
Thank you. Turning now to a subject that we've talked about in this summit, I'd like to get your all's opinions on the recent efforts to allow rescinding of claimed horses under certain circumstances about whether he survives the race and so forth. I know New York just last week, or this week, I guess, announced a looks to me, a very progressive new regulation there. So let's talk about that. And what's your opinion of that recent effort, and how does the urge to help the horse fit into the other aspects of the claiming game? Ms. Talbott, are you?
Yeah, West Virginia's, we have the traditional rule in West Virginia, which is you claim the horse regardless of the condition, you bought it, essentially. We haven't addressed the developments in California and New York in our rulemaking process at this point, although I think that in a future rulemaking cycle, our commission will definitely look at that issue, and our commission obviously likes to see what RCI is going to do on this issue as well, because we're always looking at the model rules. So it's something that I think will be likely to be addressed in the future in West Virginia, but it hasn't been addressed at this point.
Okay. Mr. Sabini, you can address this from wearing two hats.
Right. Right after I was appointed to this job, there was an article in the New York Times where a trainer of many years standing said that the claiming game is his form of gambling. And that if the horse, if he got rid of a lame horse, that was like winning at the track for him. And I found that to be repugnant and an example of why, if the racing community keeps its head in the sand, it's going to be eventually subject of much, much, much more scrutiny. So we went about talking about this, but we got some pushback within the state. I was very proud when California started their effort. They said they started their effort after discussions with us, but they beat us to the enactment. We enacted a rule a number of months ago. We've tweaked it in the last week. There's no perfect rule because we said that, you know, if the horse dies during the race or at the end of the race or is euthanized on the track, well, then there was this, you know, I always call them sort of Baltimore Catechism arguments. Well, what if they van the horse off and euthanize him in the back? You know, you're stuck. And there's no perfect answer here, and we're trying to come up with it so that the goal of protecting the horse is the first, and to try and prevent at-risk horses from being put into the claiming box in the first place. So I think its time has come.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Gallagher?
Well, I agree that the time has come to look at the situation. I'm not sure that the time has come to make any final determinations. There are two sides of the story. There's the person that has put a horse into a race that is up for sale. And then there is the line of people that are attempting to buy the horse. And those people, if things don't go their way, now want their money back. So again, I think there's two sides of the story. I think it needs to be thoroughly exhausted, and before any conclusions are firmly determined by rule that are possibly irreversible or headed to appeal court, I think commissions and bodies of law need to act carefully and firmly before making precedent-setting actions.
Okay. If you didn't get enough disagreement last night, I think we have one coming here.
I don't want to disagree. I just want to point out that, you know, they claim in Europe, they claim after the race is over. So this is not so revolutionary that it's never been done.
Okay. Joe, what's your take on that? What's your rule and your leanings?
Well, I think the rule is possibly a marginal net plus, but it really is just nibbling around the edges. In Indiana, you know, we have 2 tracks. We have quite a bit of claiming activity, and I believe in the last 6 years, you know, we've had 1 claimed horse breakdown. I think if you really want some serious reform, or at least do something that everyone says, well, you know, we want to rely on science and common sense. You know, we heard a presentation yesterday that talked about the purse to claiming price ratio. And in Indiana, 3 years ago, just after Indiana got slots, we passed a policy that said that the purse can't be more than twice the claiming price. And we did that primarily for the quality of our racing product. We wanted more money to go to the better horses rather than a lot of money go to the cheapest horses. But we were also mindful of what the AAAP had recommended, which was 1.5, not 2. But when you look at the stats from yesterday, I think they were, a horse is 2.4 times more likely to break down. And there was a correlation between the claiming price. Well, it's only going to get worse. You have a horse population that's dwindling. You have race dates that are remaining relatively stable or decreasing at a slower rate. So what you have is you have racing secretaries and tracks more reaching out and more aggressively trying to fill their races. Well, you look at the horse population, and it's shaped like a pyramid. The lowest horses are on the bottom, and they're the most plentiful. So racetracks are going after the cheapest horses, and they're going after them in the most competitive way with money to try to fill races. And I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think it's a good thing if you have a 5-claimer and you've got a purse there that's $20,000. It doesn't make a lot of sense. You're not promoting quality, and what you're promoting is what they found in New York. I think Mary and Alan did a great job on that, and Scott Palmer did a great job on that task force when they looked at the breakdowns at Aqueduct. And one of the things they found was trainers making bad decisions because the purses were just so enormous and so out of sync with the claiming price. Well, so instead of nibbling around the edges, and I don't say that the claiming rule is bad, but in Indiana, we could have that claiming rule and, it would impact one horse in 6 years. Why don't we do something to protect all the horses and do something that not only makes sense, but based upon the statistics we have, it's consistent with the analysis on the injury database.
Thank you. Let's pursue that further. How do you feel about the fact that you are a regulator and you will sort of, without too broad a brush, make the comment, trainers making bad decisions? How do you deal with the fact that that you have that sense that your horsemen are eligible to make those decisions? Does that make you think the rules need to be tighter, or what else might you do with the claiming game if you feel the horses aren't being protected enough? Go ahead.
Well, we went to the 2 times the claiming price. And with regard to horsemen making bad decisions, regulation's all about setting parameters. I mean, we do it all the time. I mean, that's our job to do it. And so to the extent that we can come up with creative ways to make the game either cleaner or make it safer for the horse and the rider, we should do that. We have horsemen in Indiana that want the bottom claimers, the 5 claimers, with a higher purse, and we just say no. Just say no.
Anyone else like to comment on that aspect? Okay. Well, let's talk about the general relationship with your horsemen's groups. I mean, we had a trainer panel yesterday. Obviously, we chose them because we know they're really, really good horsemen. How do you connect with your horsemen's groups? Do you have regular meetings? Do they tend to be reactive, or are they proactive? Do you solicit their input? And just sort of talk about your relationship with your horsemen's groups. Ms. Talbott?
Our commission has a good relationship with the horsemen at both Mountaineer and Charlestown. We do solicit their input. In fact, they had representatives on 2 separate constituent committees that the commission appointed to make recommendations on our rules. So they had a front row table at that rulemaking process, and it was very productive. They were there along with representatives from the tracks, the jockeys guilds, etc. The horsemen regularly have someone, more than one person often, attend our commission meetings. And our commission meets once a month. So the horsemen have items on the agenda frequently and frequently address the commission and have a dialogue with them. So we do have a good relationship with the horsemen. We don't always agree, but we have a very constructive dialogue with them and a good relationship.
Mr. Sabini?
Well, I always say that the regulator is like the hall monitor, and no one likes the hall monitor. We have an open door policy in our agency with all the stakeholders in racing, in tribal gaming, and in charitable gaming, and that includes the horsemen. On the thoroughbred side, we have two groups of horsemen. Mr. Violet is very able, very opinionated, fights very hard for his folks. We don't always agree, but we try to solicit his opinions and the opinions of his members. I meet informally with trainers, soliciting opinions all the time, meeting hopefully with Mr. Violet this week on implementing some of these new protocols we passed in the last week. So I think that we have a good relationship, although again, we're not going to agree on everything just by the nature of the beast. In the case of Finger Lakes, that was the first thoroughbred track in New York State to have the benefit of slots or video lottery terminals. And I think if you ask the Finger Lakes horsemen, they'd say that they found an ally in our office because upon taking over this job, I started to find that the track was very much a secondary player to the video lottery terminals. My deputy secretary for racing, Bennett Liebman in New York, once said if the VLTs were in a Las Vegas casino, they'd be in the main showroom and the horses would be in the lounge. And we had an issue at Finger Lakes where the track condition was bad enough that they wanted to cancel at 1.2 weeks of racing. Not only did I not allow them to do that, but to improve the quality of the track, but also to ask them, as part of our oversight of them, to hire a track consultant independent, and that when the track consultant visited, that each and every time the horsemen were included in the tour. Because in the past, when they had brought in consultants, the horsemen were not included, so the most important opinion, the jocks and the horsemen, was sort of not taken into account. And I'm proud to say that Finger Lakes now one of the safest tracks in the country. So we have a very good relationship with them, and as I say, the structure of being the regulator means that you're never going to be everyone's friend. But I think it's important that you have an open door, and I think it's important that you realize that the horsemen are helping put on the show. We had a big issue a couple of years ago with New York City OTB, which had ripple effects all over the country. And there were those in state government that were trying to favor New York City OTB against the tracks, and I kept saying, that's like, just our attraction on Broadway. Well, we have Broadway shows and we have ticket brokers. Well, the OTB is like a ticket broker. If there's no show, there's no tickets to broker. And the horsemen are part of the show, and an important part of the show, and we should never forget that.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. You've been had lots of posts, and what's your comment about the relationship with horsemen in your experience?
Well, ours is we work by consensus with all elements of the industry in Delaware. Unfortunately, we had a fatality in May of 2006, and that generated a great deal of conversation. I went out and talked to individual horsemen that I had known for years and asked them about where they were in a vest at the time. A multi-horse driver, multi-horse driver accident, and most of them weren't. And long story short, they really thought that it should be left up to them, which, I mean, the answer is ipso facto, we make the decisions on issues of safety, and they really shouldn't be making those decisions. However, they're included, and they do have a say in that. And John and I were drawn into some meetings that happened to take place up in the Capitol building, Legislative Hall. Representative Overly was very involved in racing, and Senator Sabini happens to know him. He's instrumental in drafting one of the first racing bills in the country after West Virginia's. They were the first two BLT bills benefiting racing in the country. Anyway, getting back to what our relationship with trainers is that we meet with them monthly. They're part of the rules. We have a subcommittee of rules, and they certainly have a say in that. They're invited. I talk to them candidly about track issues, the track condition. Another thing that came out of that accident, that fatal accident, was we moved the horseman's rep and myself went to the track manager and moved the positioning of both the equine ambulance, which is a critical component of that being examined at the beginning of each meet, and the human ambulance, where it was positioned and what it was equipped with, and a number of other things like that. But I go over the condition sheet with them. Are the conditions fair? Are they being written to the class of horses that happen to be there now? There's a change in the available horses in the summer to those in the winter, when a lot of the other tracks are closed. We do everything we can to work with the horsemen to make sure that they have an availability to race their best horses and their weakest horse. So yeah, we do our best to keep our racing product at the highest possible profile it can be, realizing the competition that we have up the road.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Gorajec, you've had the unique perspective of, I think you've been with the commission since there's been racing in Indiana, so sort of talk us through, please, your relationship with horsemen and how it if it has changed over the years.
We have a great group of horsemen in Indiana. We race all three breeds. We race thoroughbreds, we race standardbreds, we race quarter horses. They each have an association that represents them. We never take up a rule without first soliciting their input, at least rules that would impact them. They have an opportunity to address each proposed rule in writing. They have another bite at the apple in front of the commission when the commission takes up the rule. Our horsemen are very proactive integrity-wise. I mean, they really want the sport to be clean in Indiana, which is very helpful to me as a regulator, because when it comes to, some integrity-related regulations, where in some states they may balk at them, in Indiana, they often embrace them. Not all the time, but they do sometimes. A good example would be our out-of-competition testing rule. We've had out-of-competition testing, I believe, since 2007. And we have a very expansive program. We don't do it just at the track. We do it at the track. We do it off the track. And we sat down with the horsemen, specifically the Indiana HBPA, and we worked very long and very hard to get a regulation that was strict but fair, something that they felt comfortable with. And when it came time to get in front of the commission, they stood up and they said, we support this rule. And you don't see that a lot in some states. Now, I can't say that all the regulations that we pass that affect horsemen, I can't say they're in favor of all of them, but they do have input and they do have a bite at the apple.
Thank you. We had a case not long ago in Kentucky where a committee of the commission made a recommendation, and some of the horsemen did an end run and went to the legislative committee to try to get it blocked. Is that possible in your state, and have you had that experience?
It is possible in West Virginia, since our rules do go to the legislature when we proposed them. And we have had occasions where the horsemen or the breeders have lobbied the legislature to change a particular rule that we've proposed, and we get hauled up to some backroom committee office to discuss this with the chairman of the committee or particular members of the committee. And there have been times that, you know, we've had to compromise on a particular rule and change it because the horsemen have lobbied against it. So it definitely has happened in West Virginia. During my tenure, though, it hasn't been that bad because we have involved the horsemen early on with regard to our rule process. So we try to get buy-in at the earliest opportunity so we can avoid that kind of issue.
Thank you. Mr. Sabini?
Obviously, it's the nature of democracy. If the legislature, who controls your budget and does the lawmaking, can overrule you or block you at any time, and certainly we've had that. When the Interstate Compact legislation passed, the state Senate was blocked in the Assembly, largely by the harness horsemen, but the thoroughbred horsemen of NYRA played a supporting role in that. And even now, there has been some pretty stern words from a few members of the Senate in New York that if a rule governing Lasix were to be proposed at our board, that there would be legislative repercussions. And I suspect I know where those come from. So, you know, but it's the nature of democracy in every state. You know, the legislature ultimately sets the rules and the budgets, and I know because I was one of them.
Mr. Gallagher?
Well, we've been fortunate in the rules side of it. There have been situations, I would say, on the legislative side where that could take place, but I think that's when opposing counsel to the commission would attempt to talk to the Superior Court Justice or perhaps the Supreme Court in the state of Delaware, but not on the commission level. I don't think we have not encountered any subterfuge there, and I must add that the record that we have before the Supreme Court, before Superior Court and the Supreme Court has been excellent. We also have a excellent legal representation in this state. We have a prosecutor and a general counsel, so that's two attorneys dedicated to the commission, and also 4 veterinarians. So the state of Delaware has used the VLT money wisely in that regard. So we feel both commissions are very, very happy with that. There's some other things that, and we also use the radiometer for the health of the horse for pre-race blood gas analysis.
Thank you.
Yeah, so.
Mr. Gorajec?
Well, when the commission passes a rule that's unpopular with a certain constituency in the industry, you know, you always run the risk that they'll go to their legislator, the General Assembly, and try to get it reversed. And that's just really the nature of democracy or the nature of the beast. And you know, all you can do is you know, pass the rules you think in the best interest of the sport. And if they get changed or modified, they get changed or modified. You just do the best you can.
From following it and observing it and covering it and so forth, it has always seemed to me over 50-some years, almost 50 years, that we say the horsemen's groups, and they tend to be dominated by trainers. And it seems to me that the trainers tend to be more maybe strident or proactive with their relationship with the commissions than are the owners and breeders, aside from looking for premiums and so forth. First, do you agree with that observation and your experience? And if you do, how confident are you that you are able to take into account the interest of the owners and breeders as much as you are taking into account the interest of the trainers?
I think that's generally true. I know in West Virginia, the president of the Charlestown HBPA is an owner, and he's very vocal, and he speaks up on behalf of owners. And we also include the Breeders Association. We have a state Breeders Association that participates in our rulemaking process and attends the commission's meetings and has input on a lot of different issues. So I think that our commission does have an avenue by which owners and breeders do have a voice, but I would tend to agree that the trainers seem to dominate the discussion a lot of times.
Thank you. Mr. Sabini?
Well, again, I think it's the nature of the structure of the argument. Yes, I agree with you that the trainers dominate the conversation for the horsemen, but that's what they do for a living. Whereas owners, for the most part, have other interests. Do we talk to owners? Ones that talk to us. It's, you know, the old squeaky wheel gets the oil. And there are owners that have me on speed dial, and there are owners of, you know, the great majority we've never heard from. So.
And I echo what John's saying, and frequently in harness racing, you'll find that owners and trainers are one entity frequently, and trainers and owners share the same duties, but the person responsible for the horse really is the trainer, and our concern is that the horse is getting cared for in a good, sound, efficient, healthy way, and that everything that we've discussed here the last couple of days has really come to fruition, and that all the principles go into effect. That the owner and the trainer work together to care for the horse.
Okay. Mr. Gorajec?
Ed, nothing's changed in 50 years. In Indiana, you know, most of the horsemen that I come in contact with, the ones who are on the board of the various Horsemen's Association, are combination owner and trainers. And they tend to look at it with a balanced approach. You know, maybe more weighted to trainers because that's what they do for a living, but almost all of them own. But I think what you said is spot on, and you know that hasn't changed, and I don't see it changing.
Okay. I'd like each of you now to think about some of the rules in your state that you are proudest of in terms of how they protect the horse, and also maybe some other rules that you would like to put into effect on behalf of the safety and health of the horse.
Well, in West Virginia, we have a pre-race exam rule that's a little over a year old, and we're proud of that. We believe it does protect the horse. We race a lot of thoroughbred racing in West Virginia. I think we have close to a total of 450 days between the two tracks. So the fact that we have been able to hire veterinarians to do these pre-race exams under our rule has really been a plus as far as I'm concerned with regard to protecting the horse. We are in the process of proposing rules to bring our rules in the state in line with RCI model rules, which would lower the phenylbutazone threshold to 2 micrograms, and also would eliminate adjuncts. And presuming that those rules can get through our legislature this coming session, those two proposals, I believe, are directly in line with protecting the horses that race in West Virginia. We've got another very unique rule that we would like to see get enacted by our legislature this year. We've proposed it. It's already going out for public comment, and the commission has filed it with our Legislative Rulemaking Review Committee. And that rule allows the commission to take action against permit holders who knowingly or without conducting due diligence sell a horse to slaughter directly or indirectly. And I've been told that West Virginia may be the first state to enact such a rule. I know that many tracks have house rules to that effect. And in fact, both Mountaineer and Charlestown racetracks do have those house rules and have really encouraged the commission to adopt a rule that we can enforce at the commission level. We did have some pushback from some horsemen about that rule, which was a little surprising to me in some ways. We had some folks say that it's their animal, they have the right to slaughter it if they want to. And I told them they could take that argument to the legislature. So I don't know how that'll fly in the political arena, but nonetheless, we're proud that that rule's out there. And if our legislature bites off on that this year, we may be the first state to have that rule. So I'm very proud of that.
Thank you. Mr. Sabini, I know you just released a whole bunch of rules that I'm sure you're pleased with, but...
And most of you know about them, so I won't go. I'll talk a little more about some policies that we changed internally. We have 7 harness tracks and 4 thoroughbred tracks. And about a week into getting the job, I read something in the newspaper about a fatality on the track of a horse. And I called our folks together and I said, I don't want to read about it in the newspaper, I want to know first. And I said, what's our uniform standardized procedure for reporting incidents? This was in 2008. And they said, well, we have a uniform procedure. Tommy up at Batavia Downs, he sends us a Post-it note, comes by mail, and Joe over at Naira, we get an email from him, and at Yonkers, they phone it in. I said, no, that standardized means it's the same. And we created them with the help of some guidance from people like Dr. Scully, a form that said where on the track, what were the conditions, what was the temperature, what was the wind, who's the trainer, what's the purse, what were the conditions of the race, so that we can track injuries. And frankly, I think the task force has said, and the New York Times has said, that a lot of the information they got from us was really very helpful because we had it sort of with a bow around it, which most commissions have now. But that was not done. It was considered, people considered that to be, to me it was standard practice. But we're also very proud of the fact that we cut off the breeding money for Mr. Paragallo when it was found that he was mistreating his horses. That was something that we're still in litigation about. But the fact is that we took pretty decisive action on that. What do we want to do? We had a rulemaking that we put up a couple of years ago that said that if you sold a horse was claimed, that the medical records, the vet records, traveled with the horse, just like if you're in the military. We put it out for comment. I think there were 77 comments and 76 were negative. In light of what we have seen in the last year or two, I'd like to see that move forward again because I think it's common sense to do that. If you're going to buy a car, you know what happened to the car. That's what that company Carfax makes all their money on. If you're going to get a horse, you should know what's in the horse and what the horse has been through or what its injury records are. And the cloak of privacy for the horse, I thought was wrong then and wrong now. I don't think they're going to talk to each other about what their ailments were, like two ladies at a mahjong game. The idea is to protect them.
Thank you. Mr. Gallagher?
Yes. As far as being proud of something, the fatal accident was in May of 2006, and that was a pretty low moment. It was someone that kind of grew up with as a teen, knew this fellow pretty well, and seeing him right on the track in front of me, losing his life was a pretty tough moment. But, recovered from that, and within months I was working on something in close conversation with someone I was fortunate enough to meet in my first job out of state. Second job actually was Side of Downs, and I was fortunate enough to meet Dr. Sams. And I I've kept up with Dr. Sams, right up to now. And when Dr. Sams went point by point about what Epigen does to a horse, that got pretty deep into my craw. And we worked on an EPO rule in 2006, and we were one of the first, if not the first, certainly in harness jurisdiction, one of the first. Anyway, the consequences in Delaware are 10-year suspension, $10,000 fine. So we were one of the first in North America to enact that, and we're happy to have that in front of any trainer that has that on their record, as far as there. The other part of that is that the horsemen, Sal DeMario, the horsemen's rep, and the associations, all elements of the industry came in with us and said, yes, this is the right way to go. This is a good thing. The other one, Ed, is trying to now find, that's the chemical, because as we know, the horse has no say in that. It's just there, and it can't decide whether it's getting Epigen or not. And it doesn't have a say whether it races. Trainer drops it in and it goes, whether it's fit to go. Hopes it is, wants to go, and that's where Dr. Scalay comes in and the amazing amount of research she's done, and my good fortune of having been able to work with her and CEs up and down the East Coast and out in Arizona, of conversations with her, of trying to come up with something and convert this into rule language of how do we get this over into, of doing something. And I need to follow up on this. This is the second part of your question. Where are we next, and what do we do? And that is the desired part of how do we go about creating something to protect horses before they get injured. What do we do next? I've got the medical part down, the foreign substance part down pretty well, but I think pretty well, or at least on the way to it, but have an answer. But the other part is a work in progress.
Thank you. Mr. Gorajec?
Ed, as far as a policy, I'll go back to what I said a few moments ago about our policy on claiming races and purses, where we don't have a purse exceed twice the claiming price. I think that's a very positive thing to do. I think that's something that, quite frankly, that the industry should take a good, long, hard look at. The other thing we do in Indiana is we're considered early adopters of a lot of the RCI model rules, whether it's out of competition testing, safety vests, safety helmets, riding crops. We tend to act on those, and we tend to act on those rather quickly. Typically 3 months to 6 months after the RCI passes them, they're effective in our state. So that's something that we work hard to do. As far as the future, I think we need to take a good long look at what's out there on corticosteroids and see what we can do in our state to maybe address that issue. I know it's being addressed at the national level. I know there's a lot of, there are studies going on, and there'll be something coming out sooner rather than later. But that's something that I think that we'll take a look at in Indiana, and I think other states should also take a look at that themselves.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to the audience in a few minutes. I have one more question, and I don't think I alerted you that I would ask this, but when we were talking about the trainer's test yesterday, how confident are you that your trainer's test doesn't let people slip through who are just not equipped to take good care of the horse. Maybe you wouldn't recognize a horse with an oncoming fever or something. Are you pretty confident of your trainer's test, and tell us how you determined what test you give and how you organize it?
We do have a trainer's test that our stewards administer at the track level. I'm pretty confident that they do a good job with that. They collaborate with the HBPA on that so that there's an experienced horseman present when they do some of the hands-on testing. There's always going to be somebody that slips through the cracks, unfortunately. But I've actually been present a couple times when the stewards have had folks in their office who are taking the exam, and I distinctly recall one particular situation where the stewards did not pass someone on a trainer's test because of some of the answers they gave to questions in that test. So I think we do a pretty good job of it in West Virginia. I'm certain that we could improve. I honestly don't know whether we follow the national test. That's something that I heard come up yesterday, and I'm not sure that we use that model test, but we do have a test, and I think we've been pretty successful at administering it.
We have the top trainers in the country on our NYRA circuit, and I'm pretty confident that they are the best horsemen in the country in terms of knowing what problems are or anticipating problems with their horses. I'm going to flip it on its side a little. One of the things we've talked about is owner responsibility, that with aftercare of the horse being more and more talked about in the media and amongst ourselves, that, and this idea came from a trainer, I won't say who, but someone I respect a lot, that if someone's going to buy a horse, they should understand that that horse has life after the track. And once you own them, you own them. And that the fun of going to the track with your friends and trying to stand in the winner's circle is one thing, but the horse has a significant life after that, and what's your plan for it? And I think that's something we should start moving to. We want more owners in the game, we want more people to invest, but we also need to remind them of their responsibility to the animal after track.
Thank you. Mr. Gallagher?
I'm not sure on, I'm sorry, on aftercare, if those elements are being addressed in Delaware at this time.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
How about your trainer's test? Are you confident of that with your
our
position
trainers,
with rope? I would think so.
Well, the trainer's test is a USTA test, and that is that test is a practical test, and that is being given by the presiding judge, and it's also being given by the horseman's rep with the horseman's rep and a group of, a selected trainer is there. So it's a practical hands-on. They have to actually put the harness on the horse and get the horse set, rigged to a jog cart, taken out, and do a mile and bring it back in and take the harness off and identify the equipment.
Mr. Gorajec, you have, as you said, several breeds. What, just zeroing in on your thoroughbred test, are you confident that you've got the good test? And also another aspect I'd to mention, do you have any fears that that if you reciprocate, someone comes in who took their test elsewhere, do you have any misgivings that maybe you've got a horseman that you've licensed because he got licensed somewhere that you're not as confident in?
Well, we do use the national trainer's test. It's a very good test. It's a relatively high bar, especially considering what the trainer's tests were that each individual states had before. So I feel pretty good about the trainer's test. one thing you have to remember that the trainer's test is only for first-time trainers.
Right.
And because of that, and we go back to what we spoke about, yesterday with the CE, it's more than just the new people coming on board. I mean, you have horsemen out there that have been trainers for 10, 20, 30 years, and they may have self-educated themselves along the lines and kept up to date on trends in the industry and trends in training, and but they may not have. So you ask a good question, but it's really just a tiny fraction of the trainers that it affects.
Yeah. Okay, is there any questions from the audience? Kathy has a microphone here. She can bring you a microphone if you have a question. And Dr. Palmer in the back there. I will say Kathy O'Mara had a lot to do with compiling the trainer's test. It was quite an effort on her part, getting a lot of input from other people.
Ed, I want to congratulate you on a good panel this morning, and I just had a comment about the claiming rule that I think is something that needs to be said. I think that there's a lot of considerations that people take into play when they consider whether a claiming rule like this or an amendment like this should be approved. And I heard two this morning. I heard one reference to safety, and I heard another reference to the economic considerations regarding these rules. The reference in terms of safety was made that only one horse that was claimed had a fatality in Illinois, and that suggests that maybe that this rule wouldn't have a big impact if you employed it or if you put it in place. I'd respectfully suggest that the metric for measuring the impact of the rule shouldn't be the number of claiming fatalities, since the rule is designed to influence the decision-making process of the trainer in terms of conveying to him that there is a degree of responsibility when he enters that horse, that if something bad happens to him, he's going to be the guy to walk the horse back or to deal with whatever happens at the end of the race. And I think that the question more appropriately is, given the two options that one has of turning the accountability either over to the successful claimant or to the entrant, which is in the best interest of the horse in the long run from a safety standpoint, which protects the horse better? I think that's the way we'd like to think people would look at it. From an economic standpoint, I think that racing is in trouble right now. One of the real problems we have in racing is we can't find new owners for the game. We can't attract new people to invest money in the sport. And I would submit that handing an empty halter to a successful claimant sends a strong message to the prospective owner, and I think it's neither in the best interest of sport from an integrity standpoint or from an economic standpoint.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Dr. Smith?
From the standpoint of the Kentucky Equine Humane Center, and as a veterinarian, the biggest single problem that we see is that a trainer will send a horse or horses to us with the idea, saying that that horse should be a nice riding horse, and it takes 30 minutes to get the horse off the van and into a stable. He can hardly move. And the question is, will this horse even be comfortable turned out in a pasture, let alone he'll certainly never make a riding horse. And I think that's a huge problem that needs to be addressed by the Racing Commission and everyone else. How can we prevent horses from staying at the track that long?
Anybody want to comment on that? Is that a practical thing the commission could intercede on?
Well, I think some of this was touched on yesterday with the corticosteroid demonstration or the presentation. And, if these interarticular injections are causing the trouble that we think they're causing, and if there's one type that's causing is the main culprit, so to speak, then that's something that, quite frankly, needs to be regulated. and that's the commission's job. That's what we do. We regulate. So, you know, there's one thing that can be done and, quite frankly, should be done.
If I might, Doctor? Oh, he's asking for the mic.
Hello?
Yeah. Would the person bringing the horse to you, would they fill out a questionnaire? Do you have a preset template questionnaire?
Yeah, let me hand it to our executive director, and she can answer it better than I can.
When horses come to us, they are transferred to us via surrender form. And that surrender form asks the owner, whether it's a private owner or an organization, for history on the horse. And we get surrender forms that have very little information on them, and we get surrender forms that have quite a bit. And the gist of the information that we ask for is how old they are, vaccination history, riding history, all of that. So it sometimes comes with, the horse sometimes comes with a lot of information, sometimes it comes with very little information.
Well, how deep is your drilling, so to speak? I mean, do you ask, has the horse received corticosteroids?
No, not
Okay.
right now.
Would you?
Yes, we could.
You know, the corticosteroid problem, that's not just new. We've known about that for years. I was a racing commissioner here in Kentucky in the 80s and early 90s, and we knew about it then. We knew a horse shouldn't be raced right after receiving the injections, but, you know, not that much has been done.
Right. But I would say as a template, even for, you know, a horse that's not racing, could be a horse in training, it might just be valuable research information for yourself, you know, to have the information as far as the prominence of usage of that particular substance in the state, whether or not horses are receiving prednisone.
Okay, it's 10 o'clock. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the panel, and we will have a break and be back at 10:15, please. Thank you very much.